This podcast is about the Maya, and as always, we'll start with a map. The Mayan civilization occupied what is today the Yucatan Peninsula, so Mexico, all of Belize, most of Guatemala, a little bit of Honduras, and a little bit of El Salvador. And these territories, generally speaking, were pretty unhospitable. You have dense jungles, rainforests, other areas with very little water, rocky hills. The Guatemalan highlands, in particular, are pretty rugged areas. So all of these groups, whether it's pre-classic, classic, or post-classic Maya, had to deal with these conditions. And we're going to start with the pre-classic Maya. And you have a wide range of characteristics here. The earliest beginnings were around 2000 BC, and these are early cities, early sites along the Pacific coast, trading sites that focused on fish, pottery, salt, things like that. And the pre-classic ranges from sites like this to very developed cities over 1,000 years later, close to the year zero. And this period is defined by the Olmec influence. The influence started out slow, and then as the Olmec cities of San Lorenzo and La Venta became more powerful, this influence increased. And the influence had to do with culture, particularly social structure, language. We talked about chocolate in class, and things like the jaguar, things like priest functions, the way that rulers controlled their people as kind of dual religious political figures and such. And so this period, you move from these small villages along the Pacific coast to larger cities, and by 400 BC, several of these had emerged. And one of these was Caminal Juju, and it was one of the first large pre-classic sites, and it was a trade hub. No coincidence that it was over a large bed of obsidian, which was used for all sorts of products, weapons, jewelry, etc. As you can see by the last couple of pictures, not much is left of Caminal Juju, and the same goes for many other pre-classic sites, but not one of those, El Mirador. There's quite a bit left there, and that is helping us to learn more and more about the Maya. Actually, scholars are learning some new things about the Maya and essentially rethinking the old framework for the Mayan timeline. Check out this next clip.
Popol Vuh is essentially the Mayan creation myth, and a lot of historians believe that it was a contaminated document because they believed it happened somewhere along during the Spanish conquest. And so they believed part of the mythology was Mayan, and then part of it was from Spanish Catholicism. And the significance, and in going under this tent and seeing it face to face, was the fact that this artifact predates anything they thought by a millennium. And to be realizing as we're walking in this tent that I'm not in a museum, I'm not in the British Museum or in the Mexico City Anthropology Museum, I am where this structure was created and built. And not only am I looking at it, but the fact that Dr. Hansen is explaining to us that this Popol Vuh, this frieze, is only 24 meters of it is uncovered. It continues to expand around this ancient reservoir system for hundreds of meters. And he put it so well, he said, it's kind of like today if we were to find the Mona Lisa in the sewage system. It is going to rewrite Mayan history, and we are the first to show it to the world.
This is going to be something you haven't seen before, but it is going to give us an opportunity to show you some of the most amazing features of pre-classic iconography and pre-classic ideology in full manifestation.
Here we go. Oh my gosh. This
has not been stabilized, it hasn't been consolidated, it's just the way we excavated it.
Wow.
We're in the process now working with this, but you're looking at a rich cosmological scene.
When did you discover this?
Just a few months ago. So you're the first professional company to ever look at this art.
This is the creation story.
This is the creation story,
people.
And it goes back to at least 300 to 200 BC.
What was it like, just that moment of discovery when you realized what this is?
Immediately I saw the head, I realized with the number 1 and the scroll out of the, I thought, can this be the Popol Vuh? I was stunned. They had a series of pools with 2 waterfalls, dual waterfalls that fell into another pool. And then the side of their pools were richly decorated with extraordinary art on 2 levels. It shows the wealth of their society.
That they could put this drainage
on a water pool
for hundreds of meters.
That's right.
Around the whole pool.
Yeah, that's right. This keeps on going.
The whole reservoir. You see something like this, and you realize that we've only opened up less than 1% of the site of El Mirador. Dr. Hansen has basically rewritten the Mayan history books that said the top of the society, the renaissance of Maya was the classic. And actually, it was 1,000 years before the pre-classic. Were not primitive villagers. These were the real founders of the Maya Empire.
Yeah, these were the major players, and this was essentially the capital of the world in the Western Hemisphere.
Right here.
At one period of time. Yeah.
It's amazing.
So the city of Mirador is really revealing quite a bit about the Maya, even today. The pre-classic Maya might have been more developed than scholars previously thought, far bigger cities, far more powerful, and that makes us question the historical framework. And even now, only 1% of the city has been excavated. So it really shows us that history is probably going to continue changing for some time. And also the Popol Vuh. This city is showing us that it dates from at least 300 or 400 BC. So it predates any contact with the Spanish, despite the similarities that we see there between the two stories, these two creation stories, Genesis and the Popol Vuh. So another characteristic from the period that should quickly be noted are the Mayan roads, and these really linked the cities together. They were critical for that. Mirador would have been linked to many other cities, and it would have served as a hub for regional trade in the area. The roads were called white ways because they were covered with that white stucco that also covered their pyramids. Now we're going to switch to a look at the classic era Maya. And this was the real apogee of Mayan culture. The greatest achievements in terms of art, science, architecture, they were found here in the classic era. And a point that should be made to start is that instead of finding links to the Olmec during this period was defined by links to Teotihuacan. Mayan cities during the classic era traded with Teotihuacan, and the fall of Teotihuacan in 750 is almost certainly linked to the fall of classic era Mayan cities shortly after that. So we're going to begin by looking at Tikal, and it was one of the most important classic era cities, and is another city, like Mirador, that is revealing a great deal about the Maya, albeit in the classic era. Scholars today believe that it had over 50,000 people, perhaps up to 100,000. Definitely had large pyramids, large kind of ceremonial center, a downtown type area. Just like the Olmec heads that we talked about, or other pyramids in Teotihuacan, these pyramids here in Tikal really reflected the power of leaders, their power to organize large labor forces, their power to train experts, etc. One of those is Temple 4. Wasn't pictured in this red kind of recreation here, but it was one of the largest, shown here, almost 70 meters tall, and it was a funerary temple for an 8th century king. Outside of this dense urban area, you had single and multi-family homes, and it was almost a suburban area outside of these massive ceremonial plazas. And the people living in these houses, they had kitchen gardens to supplement their diets, and here they grew root crops, squash, tomatoes, that would supplement the staple crops that were grown in the agricultural zones, which extended for miles outside the city. The staple crops they were growing were maize, red nut, and the techniques used to grow these staples were raised fields and terrace farming. In terms of water supply for cities like Tikal, they were using cenotes. Cities were almost always found near cenotes. These were natural wells found throughout the Yucatan. And they also built cisterns to collect water, as well as reservoirs, some of which were up to kind of 10 Olympic-sized swimming pools, perhaps. In terms of other cities in the classic era, I just want to make one point. Cities like Tikal represent kind of pattern that existed throughout the region during the classic era. Someone from Tikal would have felt comfortable in cities such as Copan, where culture would have been similar. Shared language, shared customs, shared games like Tlachtli, the Mesoamerican ball game. Also, a city like Palenque, which was a large classic era city. People would have felt as if they could have gotten by any of these because there was a shared Mayan culture if there wasn't a Mayan empire, which in the classic era we definitely do not have. These were independent city-states that existed autonomously. So let's just take a quick look at this impressive Mayan culture that drew these cities together during the classic era. Things, of course, like the calendar fell into this category, but so too did lots of other things. Shared stories like the Popol Vuh, shared gods from these stories. The creator god, for example, Itzamna, the one who created the heavens, created the earth, created the animals, created everything that can be found there. He's the one who gave them their sacred knowledge, instructed them about rituals, sacrifices, fasting, auto-sacrifice, which is pictured here, and other rituals, some involving animals like the jaguar, others involving chocolate. Chocolate was, of course, very important to the Maya. It started out as an elite drink. Cacao had always been important at times. Cacao beans were actually used as currency. Besides the elite, of course, warriors, the sick, elderly could also drink chocolate. Over time, it trickled down and became a drink of the common people, but generally it was for ceremonies and for important people until later. Here we see the glyph for chocolate, which is one of the many things that can be found in the Mayan books. And there's really 3 of those that we have today that matter. Actually, that's all there are, is 3. The Dresden Codex is the most important of them. It's the best. It offers us the most information. Some of the others, or the other 2, are the Madrid Codex and the Paris Codex. All 3 of those, of course, are in Europe. Art and architecture are another 2 things that were very impressive about the Maya in this era. The Maya were the only ones in the Americas to develop the arch. You have the corbelled vault. The key there is the capstone or keystone, and also their art was more realistic than other groups in Mesoamerica. Math is somewhere where the Maya absolutely excelled. Their system of math had 20 as its base number, not 10, but the real key was that they developed the 0 within their system of math. Math, of course, was a big part of their astronomy, and here you can see the observatory where they observed the stars. Venus, the Pleiades, these constellations, these planets, they were key in how the Maya viewed time and how they viewed really their whole existence. Everything was cyclical, and it all kind of came back to what you see here, the Mayan calendar. And so that is the pre-classic and classic era Maya, as well as a quick look at Mayan culture. And just to add one quick more point about culture, the music that you've been hearing during this podcast is authentic Mayan music, and kind of like the Aztecs, the Mayans held certain instruments to be very important. Drums, flutes, they were key, as to were whistles, and those would be used in times of war. And actually, many commoners have been kind of found buried with instruments, showing that absolutely, yes, like the Aztecs, the Maya valued music.